Well, welcome back to another episode of Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden, and it's my great pleasure to have Tamara Lich of the Freedom Convoy with me again. And we're going to be talking about a number of things, and we'll be back in just a minute.
So we are in a very precarious position in this country. We need political change, but we also need the resolve to resist.
Now, Tamara, in my writing, I've taken to referring to you as a Freedom Convoy personality because I don't want anyone thinking you were an organizer because that's what this whole trial's about. So I don't know if you've noticed that, but I've been painstakingly trying to avoid any kind of linkage that would in any way help the prosecution in their charges here. So I've been referring to you and Chris as personalities of the Freedom Convoy because I think that really is
Mm.
something that you become. You become a symbol, I think, of freedom in this country, and not just a symbol of the Freedom Convoy, but a symbol of freedom. I mean, how do you look back on the last couple of years? And we're heading into a 2-year anniversary in February, and the trial will not be over, but we'll get to that in a minute. But how do you feel right now? How does Tamara feel as a person having gone through all of this up till now?
Well, I honestly don't think the magnitude of this has hit me yet. I think I'm kind of waiting until the end of this trial so that everything's done and settled so I can kind of sit down and process, everything that's happened. It was the way I see it, I'm just a normal person. I'm just a regular person that, got together with some other regular people and we just had enough. And so I don't feel any different. Like I don't know how to explain it. I can only be me.
I think I understand exactly how you feel. You're not the sort of person who sees themselves as a star, and you really
No,
have
not even
become a
a little
symbol
bit.
of freedom, though. And but you were telling me when we emailed the other day that the trial is on hold again, and you don't expect to get back until March. How is it possible?
I have no idea. We'll have a couple more dates, but not full days. And then I think we've got about 10 days left for our defense. So hopefully mid-March, I guess. I don't know why it's taking so long, but it's true what they say in the Canadian legal system. It's the punishment is the process.
Oh, that is so true. You've been
Mhm.
having to sit there day after day after day. Now you're going back and forth, obviously, from Ottawa, and you're when the trial is in session. I mean, you're going back from your home to Ottawa. Is the travel taking a toll on you?
It's quite a drive, but my husband and I have got it down to an art now. We can make it in a half. If as long as we team drive, we're good to go. But I mean, it's an incredible journey, but it's definitely one that we've come to love. Canada is a beautiful country, and if you haven't driven across it, everybody should. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, I've made the trip from my hometown in Comox, Vancouver Island, to Ottawa about 5 times by car. So I agree with you completely.
Wow.
You don't really appreciate the length and breadth of this country until you travel by car. You just don't get it by aircraft, and it is a huge and beautiful country. And I've had a chance to see some of the other parts out east as well since I've been in Ottawa. But it is a it is a beautiful country. Now you were speaking before you started singing at your concert in Niagara on the Lakes. And you said you basically have not been
Yes.
uh, put into any kind of depression or anxiety over the trial, over the charges, that you're still fairly upbeat and optimistic about yourself and Canada. Now, how do you
Mhm.
feel about the state of the country
Yeah.
today?
Well, I'm concerned, obviously, and but I feel like things are turning around, and I think I talked about that in that speech too. Like I really feel um, that we're being bombarded by a lot of nonsense legislation and policies right now. And I don't think that that's by accident since the convoy. I think the convoy was the beginning of the end. It was like a great wake up So everything that they had kind of planned on implementing, they had to speed up and get it through faster. But the great thing about the convoy was that it opened up so many people's eyes. And I'll tell you, people still come up to me all the time and they tell me their stories. And I can't tell you how many people have said, during the convoy, I didn't like you and I called you a lot of nasty names and I didn't know what you were doing there. But throughout the course of what's happened since then, they've also had their eyes open. And so they can kind of, they see the concerns that are happening in our country too. So people are getting involved and taking action, and I think it's very positive. I mean, we are getting bombarded with a lot of negativity right now, but I mean, we're Canadians, and we're some of the most positive people on the planet, as far as I'm concerned, and I'm the same.
Well, I talk to a lot of Americans because my primary media, the Post Millennial, is cross border. So I do largely Canadian stories. I do a lot of Canadian columns or in American columns. And when I'm speaking to people in the United States, they point to you and the Freedom Convoy as examples of what Canada is really all about. It's not about Justin Trudeau. It's not about craziness in the schools. It's not about censorship. It's about people like you and the Freedom Convoy. And they really point to that experience in January, February as being a turning point, not only for Canada, but for the world. And is that would you agree with that?
I would agree with that, actually. When we started organizing this, we had no idea how it was going to take off and no idea that it would go so global. That was a shock to us, but it really did. It resonated all around the globe.
And it's amazing to me how everybody around the world is going through the same kind of crises, and not just with the mandates, but there's a war on farmers. I was recently at an event with Christine Anderson, and one of the speakers was talking about the crisis in the Netherlands and how the farmers there have had such incredible trouble. They have had rules and regulations imposed on them to limit the size of their farms, limit the size of their livestock, limit the size of the fertilizer they use, or the amount of fertilizer they use. And Canadian farmers are going through the same kind of thing. It's like there's a globalist trend here, and I think though that what the Freedom Convoy achieved is that we can fight back. We can fight back. Canadians don't have to just sit here and take it. And I want to thank you personally because you inspired me, and the Freedom Convoy inspired me not to get another vaccine. I got 2 vaccines because I thought it was the right thing to do. I have a mother who's in a nursing home, and I thought it's the right thing to do for the elderly. It's the responsible thing to do, and I trusted my government. And I trusted the pharmaceutical companies to make a product that was safe. And I have completely moved from that position. And I think, but because you stood up against it, and Chris Barber stood up against it, and so many thousands of others stood up against it, you encouraged us all to say we don't have to take this. And I lost a sister last month who was a pro-vaccine advocate, and she couldn't get enough of it. And I seriously believe her death from pneumonia was probably caused by the vaccine. I know I'm not asking you to comment. I believe that, but I think my stake in this whole issue has become that much more personal because of that. And I salute the work you did. And I think one of the reasons we're not walking around with masks on right now, and we don't have a minister of health saying you better get another booster shot next month, is because of the work you did. So I thank you for the courage that you showed and determination you've showed going through this horrible legal process. So I applaud you for that.
Mm. Thank you, David. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Mhm. And it I sat there during 90% of the prosecution's testimony. Some of it I found very comical.
For whatever it
And once
was.
again, I won't ask for your direct comment on some of it, but it mystified me at times that they kept playing social media clips where you and Chris were constantly telling Freedom Convoy participants to peacefully protest, not to interfere with the local residents and to obey the police. If I heard it once, I heard it 100 times. And I scratched my head and I wrote about this extensively. I said, what are they trying to prove with this? I mean, did you sit there and wonder what is the point here?
Well, I kind of sat there and thought, thank you. This is my defense. So you're presenting my whole defense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it was extremely awkward. And at times, of course, the prosecution played videotape or clips that they obviously hadn't even pre-heard or played for themselves because there's background noise, phones going on. You can't hear it. And at times it was a three-ring circus, and I was wondering what are they trying to do here? And
It was.
I mentioned that.
Yeah.
I mentioned that you're a lawyer, and I think you've been very well represented by Lawrence Greenspan, who I've talked to most of the time. I know you've got 3 other folks on the trial, but Lawrence, I think, is doing a fabulous job. And I spoke to him several times about the defense, and he just, he publicly doesn't want to see what he really wants to, what he's really feeling. But he agreed that the prosecution it was tending to show a lot of clips that showed you and Chris Barber in a very favorable light. And I think that's been the impression. I've talked to some of the reporters who are there, not always from friendly sources. And there's a general consensus is that the prosecution was not always playing material that benefited their side of the case. So I think overall, I mean, everybody knows my opinion on this case. I'm a columnist. I'm an op-ed writer as well as a reporter. I've made it clear that I'm on your side, and I don't think there's a case here. But there's a lot of other media there who are, if they're not in the court every day, they're reporting on it. I think they've been fairly fair. Have you found the reporting thus far to be fairly objective and fair?
Tone shift in the reporting that's happened with probably within the last 6 months. As more and more evidence comes out that shows that we were peaceful and we were following the law and we did our very, very best to keep people safe and, public safety and all that kind of stuff. I've noticed that a shift in the tone of some of the mainstream media reporting because I think they know they've lost the narrative, like they lost the plot. Read the room. And so I think it's softening a little bit. I mean, they still grab the headline catching quotes like the downtown residents were terrorized or you know what I mean. But I think for the most part, they're doing much better. I will tell you, David Fraser is doing an amazing job and he's with the CBC. So, when I talked to him a few days ago before we left Ottawa to thank him, because I know that he's doing his very best to keep everything neutral and unbiased. And I think he's doing a good job. And so for me to shout out anybody from the CBC is quite a thing, let me tell you, because I'm not a fan.
I was going to mention David Fraser by name because I've spoken to him on a number of occasions, and if I miss a day, that's the story I go to because I know I'm going to get the whole story. Unlike what I usually experience from CBC. So I've actually written for CBC in the past as sort of a token conservative columnist, and I know CBC has an intrinsic bias. I know they're tendentious. I know that they did everything possible to undermine this protest during the time it was occurring,
100%.
while they sat in their heated offices and never left. And I, on the other hand, I was reporting at the time for Human Events, an American publication, and I was out in the street freezing, and I didn't see any other reporters in the mainstream media there. Oh.
Not often.
You
No.
were going to say?
Yeah, it was
No,
it was a travesty, honestly. I think the mainstream media missed out on a golden opportunity. Like we saw the unity that happened throughout the convoy, and I think the mainstream media had a golden opportunity to really bring the whole country together if they would have only told the truth. And instead, they chose to call us names, make wild accusations like we were infiltrated by the Russians or tried to burn down an apartment building. I mean, there was no fact checking. And then, as you saw throughout the inquiry, what happened was during the convoy, the police in the city were responding to media reports, but the media reports weren't accurate. And then you saw this cycle of BS, basically, that just perpetuated itself throughout the whole thing.
That if there was a lot of misinformation. I don't always like to use that word, but there was a lot of news stories that were totally based on social media reports from people. Like the one that comes to mind is that ridiculous story about the arson that supposedly occurred in an apartment complex. That was entirely based on
Mhm.
one person's imaginary tweet. It was all from Twitter, as it was known at the time.
Yeah.
And it was any investigation was based on some idiot writing about this arson that never happened. And if it had, what did it have to do with the Freedom Convoy? Like so many things we found out afterwards.
They were so desperate to paint us as violent insurrectionists. They were so desperate. And that's why we had to take great pains to try and, constantly remind people to be peaceful, because they were just, it was provocation. It was provocation at every corner, every turn. And I'll tell you, the Canadians, they didn't bite. And it is something to be really proud of. We held our ground. We remained peaceful. We weren't, radicals and, destroying property. And so Canadians should be very proud of themselves for that. I think they really kept it together.
Yeah, I certainly think there was incredible restraint shown. And I was there, of course, when the Emergencies Act was invoked, and the police came down very hard. It was brutal, and reporters were even hurt in the rush and the suppression that occurred. And I was there to watch it, unlike a lot of other reporters who watched it from their windows. And it was very brutal response. But I think at that point, a lot of Canadians said this has gone way too far. This is not Canada, and peaceful protesters should not be under the literal boot of the police. This looks more like a
Yeah.
totalitarian state, and I think that affected public opinion, don't you?
Oh, totally, I do. Yep. I think that was the beginning of his downfall, finally. But it sure has taken a long time. If they could speed that up a little bit, that would be good.
Yeah. Of course, Justin Trudeau is not in any way involved in this trial. People keep suggesting to me that this is Trudeau against, and I say yes. Trudeau's policy is there every day, but this is technically not the federal government that has issued these charges.
Mhm.
It strikes me though as very ironic, and I couldn't help but laugh at the irony and the hypocrisy. Trudeau, of course, and so many liberals described the Freedom Convoy participants as not just racist and misogynistic, in Trudeau's famous words, which he lied about at the inquiry. He said he'd never said that about Freedom Convoy participants being racist and misogynistic. He also tried to smear the convoy with Nazi symbolism, claiming he saw a Nazi flag. And I'm not even going to get into that because it's such sheer nonsense. But so many liberals describe the convoy as a bunch of Nazis, which I think is the ultimate smear these days. As calling someone a Nazi or a racist, it doesn't get much lower than that. But it struck me as almost poetic justice when Trudeau and all the speaker and the government house leader all get implicated for inviting a former Nazi Waffen SS soldier to the House of Commons. He sits in the gallery and gets 2 standing ovations. Now that was a real Nazi. Did you find that ironic that Justin Trudeau would be at the center of that?
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, these people aren't smart. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're smart people, they're just not wise. And I said this in my speech in Niagara last weekend, it feels like a bit of karma is coming back to bite these guys in the butt, because the things that they accused us of doing is all coming back on them, like the taking money from foreign entities. Well, we found out, about 4 or 5 months ago, that excuse me, the Trudeau Foundation was taking money from Beijing. They accused us of being infiltrated by the Russians and having foreign interference. Well, hello, China. You know, that's come back on them
Mhm.
also. And just stuff like that. Karma is a thing. And I believe all the things that they've accused us of doing is all coming back to roost now, and it looks really bad for them. I couldn't believe that Nazi in the house. I mean, oh my gosh, do some research.
Yeah, I was actually the first Canadian publication. Post Millennial was the first Canadian publication to release that story. And actually, I have to confess, I found out about the story by reading Ezra Levant's tweets the night before. He was mulling over this and considering
Mm.
going with it. And I said, "Holy hell! I know enough about the history myself." And all I looked for was one credible source to say that this was true, that this guy had been a member of this regiment. And I found a Jewish publication in the States, very credible, had run with the story first. And this was early Saturday morning.
Mm.
They had come out with the story. And I said, yes, let's go with this. This is true. And then, of course, a lot of other people followed. But it wasn't until it became so well known in social media that the legacy media really acknowledged
Mm.
the story, that this was a massive embarrassment. They've never acknowledged that Trudeau knew about it, that the House leader knew about it. They met with this man before the event. They had pictures taken with him. They won't acknowledge that, but they will acknowledge that, yeah, the speaker invited the guy, and it's a huge international embarrassment. So I'm sure I thought about you at the time,
Oh,
thinking,
they're being
yeah,
paid good
who's
money
who the
not
net?
to report on that stuff.
What? Sorry,
Sorry to
I
cut you
didn't
off
hear
there. I
that.
think we have a bit of a lag. I said, well, they're being
Oh,
paid good money not to report on stuff like that.
yes, well, it's true, isn't it? And
Huh.
in the October update, uh, there was more money allocated to legacy media to
Saw
pay
that.
for reporters. Trudeau continues to subsidize most of the media in Canada. And I just did a story last night about the CBC. Finally, the president of the CBC, Catherine Tate, is going to be hauled in front of the Heritage Committee to explain how it's possible to cut 600 positions and still have bonuses for the executives. I mean, I think this is finally there's some
No
responsibility
kidding.
for and that to
Yeah,
me,
like who are these people?
yeah, how can you possibly cut 600 positions, still be getting 1.3 billion dollars from taxpayers, have paid advertising, and yet you've got you can give bonuses to people, and that to me shows how insulated the Ottawa bureaucracy is from reality. I don't think they realize how tough it is.
No, they seem to live in a bit of a bubble out there, and they real have no sense of reality in the rest of the world. Is what I've kind of noticed, right?
Yeah,
There
like I
really
hear
is an
every
Ottawa
day.
bubble, and they don't think that anything exists or happens of importance outside of it.
Yeah, I hear every day in question period how Canada has the lowest inflation amongst the G7. I don't believe it. I think the numbers are being cooked. I don't believe we have 3.1% annual inflation. I have to buy groceries every week, and that's certainly not what I'm seeing in reality. And I'm not seeing that anywhere in Canada, the inflation rate that low. But I don't think the people who say that really have an appreciation for how hard it is to make a living and how high the cost of living is. And even more so, statistics like saying that we're the lowest in the G7 doesn't pay your bills. It doesn't put gas in your tank and doesn't heat your house. And I heard a member say that last week, and I thought, you don't often hear profound things said in question period. You hear a lot of rhetoric on both sides, talking points. But that to me struck a nerve, is that no, statistics from the government aren't going to pay the bills. And I thought that was very profound.
I agree, and Christopher Freeland acts like we should all be falling all over ourselves and so grateful for what a fantastic job they're doing. And meanwhile, I'm going to tell you, I live in a very small city, and the homelessness here that I've seen change and grow it's shocking. It's shocking. Even in Ottawa, you go down Rideau Street in Ottawa, you like the homeless, there's a massive problem there. you know I mean, I think like I said, they're just so out of touch with reality. It's all word salad and virtue signaling nonsense. Like, question period is a great example. Wouldn't you rather turn on the TV and see two sides of the house working together to solve some problems instead of this what is akin to watching a WWE wrestling match? I mean, it's ridiculous. You're running a country. This isn't, kindergarten playtime. Let's be adults and fix some problems.
Yeah, and it always seems to come back to climate change. No matter what the question is, it's all about climate change. And I don't know anybody who's losing sleep over climate change. I know a lot of people who are losing sleep over their mortgages, or over their rents, over the price of gas and groceries, but I don't know anybody who's losing sleep over climate change. And that to me is
The
one
only
of the
people that'll be
travesties.
losing sleep over climate change are the ones that make a lot of money off of it, right? That's it, period.
Yeah, yeah. And I recently lampooned a video that Justin Trudeau put out where he's a heat pump salesman. And it's just, you have to see it to believe it. Maybe you have. And he's literally pretending to install a heat pump. And he's got Seamus O'Regan standing uncomfortably
Oh,
next to him, nodding nodding about how these are just wonderful, and they're the panacea for Canada's heating problem. And it, I have said a dozen times now that not only are they not carbon neutral, you have to plug them in. They have a power source. There's no magic power source. They need electricity, and there's not enough electricity in Atlantic Canada to power them for every home that they're supposed to go in. But not only that, they don't work in temperatures below minus 15
yeah.
degrees Celsius. So I'm thinking, here's Justin Trudeau in a video that I think 500 people watched. 500 people watched the Prime Minister's video,
Wow.
and he's selling heat pumps as a solution that's not going to work. And I think, how low can this man go in terms of lying? How low can he go?
Oh, I don't think he could drop the bar any lower, honestly.
Yeah, I don't think he ever is capable of telling the whole truth. And this is a man who spent his life performing blackface, and yet the first thing he accuses his critics of is racism. And the hypocrisy and the narcissism is just phenomenal. And of course, that's the first thing he accused the Freedom Convoy of. First thing, racist, misogynist, which is what he is.
Yep. Yep. Somebody said that made that
So
comment to me the other day, that they thought it was funny that one of the main organizers, me, that they were, so misogynistic.
yeah, and he seems to want it both ways, claiming that you're the primary organizer, but somehow you're not a man. And that didn't never seem to jive with Trudeau's narrative, or the narrative of much of the mainstream media at the time. So I think we're at least halfway through the trial, and as I've said several times, this is the sort of thing that should have been over in a couple of days. It shouldn't have happened at all, but it should have been over in a couple of days. Most mischief trials don't even come to a trial, or mischief charges don't even come to a trial, and yet here we are. We started the Tuesday after Labor Day. I remember it quite vividly. It was a beautiful summer day. And here we are approaching winter, and we're not even halfway. We're about halfway through, I guess. And we probably won't have a verdict, though, till maybe summer.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, if we get wrapped up in March, which, like I said, I'm not sure how many days we still have left. I think it's about 10 days. If we can find all those dates in March, then who knows how long it's going to take for her to make her decision too. So I mean, yeah, we could be looking at the summer or fall, which is absolutely, I mean, the taxpayer money that they are spending on this is phenomenal. And when you think about it, I mean, even with the lack of evidence that you've seen and I've seen, I mean, I don't even know how this made it past the JPT.
No, I don't either, in all honesty, except we both know it's political. We both know this would never have happened to anybody else
Yeah.
if there wasn't a political basis for this. And I think as I watch this, and I have written quite extensively on how humorous it can be at times, but also in the back of my mind,
Mhm.
I'm saying this is all about intimidation. This is all about trying to ensure this doesn't happen again. This is all about convincing Canadians that if you protest Justin Trudeau's policies or the provincial government's policies or even the municipal government's policies, you're going to be hauled in front of a courtroom, embarrassed, humiliated, and they'll attempt to bankrupt you in the process. And I know you're getting fundraising for this. Thank God for that, because and you couldn't do it otherwise. Who could? But do you think that's at the is that foundational to this? Is this about intimidation?
Excuse me. 100%. 100% it is. Unfortunately for them, they picked on the wrong woman because I am not going to back down. They do not scare me and they do not intimidate me. And so they have no power over me. But what they're trying to do is scare everybody else, right? Well, don't do this, like you said, or we're going to drag you through the court system. I'm very lucky that I have the democracy fund helping me with my legal fees, but all the cost of us traveling back and forth, staying there, eating there, all comes out of our pocket. So it's lawfare. They want to deplete your resources and demoralize you and intimidate you. And unfortunately for them, in my case, it's not going to work.
No, clearly it has not worked, and I don't think it's intimidating the amount of Canadians that they hoped it would. Because your story is inspirational,
Mhm.
and that leads me to my next to last question. How is the book doing? How is Hold the Line, the book, doing?
It's good. I'm not exactly sure what the numbers that we've sold, but it's in Canada, it's really hard to have a book take off, but it's being very well received. I do see, a lot of the comments and reviews on Amazon, and a lot of people are really enjoying it. And I find it to be a very easy read. It's easy to get through, and there's a lot of details in it that people didn't know about. And it's funny, when we started talking about writing the book, we discussed how long it should be, and I remember Ezra saying about 250 pages. And I just thought, that's impossible. Like, this is a saga. There's like so much, there's even so much that's not even in the book. Like, there was just so much happening at the time. And so much even that's come out through the inquiry and even some of the evidence that we've heard here through our trial. So yeah, I'm really proud of it. And maybe there'll be a second one to kind of wrap the bow around it after this is all over.
Well, that's an interesting prospect, because the story is certainly not finished, is it? You've got more to tell.
No.
So, where do you what happens to you after this trial is all over? And I'm hoping and praying for your vindication and your acquittal. But whatever the case, what happens to you after this is all over? Where does your life go?
That's a great question. I ask myself that every day. My focus right now is to make sure that everybody else that needs help fundraising for legal fees, because there's a lot of people that have trials coming up or hearings coming up, or fines to pay, that don't have, an organization like TDF or the JCCF helping them. So I think it's really important that all of these people get some attention and some funding, so that if there's one thing I've learned out of this whole experience, is that you get the lawyer that you pay for. unfortunately. And at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to. And so I really want to try and help as many people as we possibly can. And then I don't know what's going to happen. What I mean, I really, would like to continue advocating for Canadians' rights and freedoms. I mean, that's something I believe that we always have to be vigilant about, and I think we've lost that. This is why we're at where we're at. You know, we kind of dropped our guard on that a little bit, and I think that we need people that are gonna stand up for those rights and be vocal about it.
Well, I think in you, Canadian freedom has not only an eloquent spokeswoman, but a courageous one who's actually lived it. It's easy, much easier to talk about these things, to say that, to espouse freedom, to espouse liberty. But when you've had to live it the way you have, and you've had to defend it the way you have, I think that gives you a credibility that a lot of commentators and pundits will never have. And I think that's makes you rather unique.
Mm.
And I hope you can continue to fight for freedom, no matter where your life goes, Tamara.
Thank you, David.
Well, that's thanks for talking with me
However it
today.
goes, I'm sure it won't be boring.
No, I don't think anything will be boring henceforth. But we're 2 weeks away from less than 2 weeks away from Christmas. It's boy, I don't know where the year's gone. It has been a busy year, and I'm sure you feel the same. But I wish you and yours a
Mhm.
very merry Christmas, and I will see you back in the courthouse in March. And I know my readers are hoping and praying along with me that this is a happy ending for you. And thanks for keeping me apprised of what's been happening, and I'll continue to communicate. And God willing, when victory comes with the judge's statement, we can celebrate together.
Yes, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, David. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here today, Tamara. And saying goodbye from Stand on Guard, I'm your host, David Krayden. It's been my pleasure talking to Tamara Lich for the last half hour or so. And God bless you all.